Hello and welcome to my channel. This is Cheese from Scratch, the channel that teaches homesteaders around the world how to milk their cows and turn that milk into all sorts of different cheeses and dairy products. My name is Robin, and in today's video I'm going to be showing you how I make butter for my family. Now, butter is more of a method rather than a recipe, and I feel that I've kind of perfected this method over the last 10 years of making butter for my family, and so I'm excited to show you in today's video kind of how I do that, how I streamline it, how I make it a little bit easier, how I keep it a little bit cleaner because it's historically pretty much a messy activity. So I'm going to be showing you a few of my tips and tricks today in this video. Now, butter has been made for thousands of years. It's, as I said, a method rather than a recipe. It's where you take cream and you agitate it in some way, you churn it to cause the butter fat in that cream to actually separate from the buttermilk. So there's plenty of different ways that you can do this, and in today's video I'm going to be showing you how I do it in my kitchen blender. It's not a fancy blender or anything, just a regular kitchen blender, and it's actually my preferred way to make butter. I've tried making butter in a lot of different appliances, and it's kind of the one that I've landed on. Now, the first step of making butter is to choose the heaviest possible cream. Now, you can see here in this video that I am skimming the cream off of the top of my milk jars here. So underneath is the milk, and with raw milk that hasn't been homogenized, the cream is actually going to rise to the top. So what I do is I just take a regular little scoop, like a kitchen scoop, and I just skim the cream right off the top. And if I start to get any milk, so when you're looking down into the jar, you can actually see where the milk is. When I start to get any milk, that's when I stop skimming. And so I'm taking this milk and I'm throwing it into the cheese pot, because today I was actually making Colby cheese. So I just skimmed off as much cream as I could and then threw the rest into the cheese pot, and a little bit of that cream will get incorporated up into that cheese. So it's not a waste at all. Now, when I first started making butter, I kind of thought that I could just dump the cream off and I could save that cream for butter making. And this was not working for me because you actually end up getting too much skim milk in there. Even though it seems like you could just dump off the top of the cream and save the milk in the bottom, it gets to have too much milk in it and it won't churn properly. So really important that you're actually scooping or skimming that cream off of the top. Historically, this was done with seashells. So I always think that every time I go to the beach, I think, oh, it would be pretty cool to find a seashell that I could skim the cream off of my milk with, but that's a little fun fact for you. So once I have skimmed the heaviest cream off of my milk, what I do is I allow that cream to sit on the counter until it comes to 62 degrees Fahrenheit. And this usually, from cold cream, usually takes about 2 hours to reach this temperature, just sitting at room temperature. Now, if you didn't want to wait for this time, you could just warm your milk up on the stove to 62 degrees Fahrenheit, or warm your cream up on the stove, sorry. And the reason that we warm it up or allow it to come up to this temperature is just because it kind of softens the butter fat, and it's going to allow our butter or our cream to churn to butter much quicker than if we don't. Just as an example here, I have taken my 62 degree Fahrenheit cream and put it into the blender, and this is real time. I've not sped this up or done anything, and just from the moment that I pressed start on the blender, I've already got butter. That took maybe less than 1 minute to churn that cream into butter, whereas if I hadn't allowed it to come up to that 62 degrees Fahrenheit, it would have taken a lot longer. In fact, it could have taken up to 20 minutes. So after I have put that cream into the blender, I've pressed, usually I go on medium speed. All I do is allow it to whir around in there until I hear a noise change. And you're going to hear that buttermilk kind of sloshing around, and that is your sign that that butter is actually separated from the buttermilk. When you open up, you're going to see something like this. You're going to see that there is this buttermilk in here, and there's this butter, this golden butter. Sometimes if it's in the winter, your butter will be, or if you have different your cows are on different diets, you'll have different colored butter, but usually it's going to be kind of a yellowish color. Now, once you have seen that this is, what I do is I pour off the buttermilk into a jar. You can pour it through a strainer if you would like to have make sure that you're not going to be losing any of those butter grains. But I figure I'm going to use this buttermilk for baking or anything like that anyways, so if a few little butter grains fall into the buttermilk, it's not a big deal for me. It's just one way that I save dishes for myself, because butter making is pretty messy using all that fat. So once I have dumped the buttermilk off of the butter, what I like to do is just throw it back in the blender for just a few seconds, just not even, probably 5 seconds, just of whirring it around. And this is just going to extract a little bit more buttermilk for you. And then after I dump that off, I actually pour cold water in there, and that's what you can see me doing right now. I've poured cold water into that blender, and this is called washing the butter, and it's just going to help to wash out any of that buttermilk that is still in there. And this is just one way that I streamline butter making for myself a little bit and just make it quicker. Otherwise, you're doing this all by hand. You're squishing as much buttermilk out as you can, and then you're ending up having to wash it all out, and you still have to do some manual labor with this, but it saves you a lot of time. And so I just throw that buttermilk water that I just poured out of the blender there, I just throw it to my chickens because you could use it for baking if you wanted or anything, but my chickens like it. So again, didn't use a strainer or anything. I figure if my chickens get a few little butter grains, well, lucky them. But if you wanted to make sure that you get every single last butter grain, you could put a little strainer before you dump that water out. So once I have washed the butter in the blender, what I do is I take it out and I put it into a bowl. And so this is kind of where the labor of love starts, because butter making, you do want to try and get as much buttermilk out as you can. If you leave buttermilk in your butter, it can cause off flavors and it's not going to store as well. And so really, to have the best tasting butter, the butter that tastes closest to what the grocery store sells, because I know that kind of homemade is always better, but really at the end of the day, we're trying to just make a product that is really similar to what the grocery store sells. Better, but really similar. And so a lot of times when people go to making homemade butter, they kind of think that it has an off taste, or they think that it doesn't sit on the counter and store quite as well. And so this is kind of why it's really important to make sure that we get as much of the buttermilk out, as much of the liquid out of this butter, because it's going to store well, it's going to taste better, and my family just likes to have butter that tastes like it comes from the store. But it looks better because it's yellow. So I actually had some more cream to churn, so I go straight to the max line on my butter churn. So the max liquid line, I pour all the way to the top of there. It's never done me wrong, but I know some people say go a little bit below that, but I just always go to the max line. So that means that I can do about 2 quarts of cream. Is that right? Maybe a little bit less than 2 quarts of, maybe 1 quart of cream. I don't know. 1.5 quart of cream in my blender, I think, at a time. So oftentimes I end up having to spin another batch, so I do the same exact thing where I pour the buttermilk off, whiz it again, then throw some cold water in it, whiz that again, and then I'm going to just scoop all this butter together, and this is where I'm going to start working it and really trying to get all of that buttermilk out. So the first thing you're going to do after you have put this butter into the bowl is you're going to start pressing it around. And this is to extract any of the buttermilk that is still in there, any of the liquid that's still in there. You're just going to kind of squish it around with your spoon. Right off the bat, you're going to see that there is a little bit of liquid in there, and I just pour it right off. Again, this has been washed now, so I'm just going to pour this to my chickens. I'm not going to save it for making cultured buttermilk or anything, because it's mostly water. So I just squish it around. I try to make it as flat as possible on the sides of the bowls, on the side of the bowl. This is just going to make sure that I have a lot of surface area, and I'm trying to get all the little pockets of moisture out of there, because butter is a fat. It holds moisture in pockets really well, and so the flatter you can kind of get it, the more you can sort of move it around in there, the more water you're going to extract. So you can see I just kind of make it like a flat pancake and just pat it. Sometimes I kind of slap it, and you're just trying to get all of that water out of there. So once I have squished it around and got as much of the buttermilk out as I think that I can, I'm going to wash it again. And so what I do is I just put some nice cold water in there, and I'm just going to squish the butter around in that nice cold water. And so I'll move it all around, and just trying to get all those little pockets and make sure that every kind of piece of the butter is touched by that water, is washed by that water. And at first when you put that water in there, you're going to notice that it's quite clear, but as you move the butter around, you're going to see that it becomes sort of a creamy color. And so this is evidence that there is still more buttermilk in there and that you're washing it out of there. Now, once you have moved it around as much as you can, you're going to dump that water off, and you're going to put more clean water in there, more cold, clean water. And again, it's going to appear clear, and you're just going to, again, agitate it around until it looks a little bit more creamy. Dump that water off, and if you need to, add some more water back in there. And you're going to keep doing this until the water is clear. And realistically, I go until it's clear-ish. Now, if I really had a lot of time on my hands, I could go until it's completely clear, but I just go until it's clear-ish because I would be there forever. Even this process takes probably about 10 minutes of just hands-on labor of moving this butter around and washing it. So once that water is clear or clear enough, I dump it off and I say, good enough, time to salt this butter. So what I do when I salt butter is I like to, again, make as much surface area as I can. So I pat it all flat and then I sprinkle butter to taste onto it. We like salty butter, but if you kind of want a little bit less salt, just go with whatever your family likes. Now, salt is a preservative in this, so it will keep your butter fresher for longer. So if you've chosen to make unsalted butter, you're going to want to keep that butter in the refrigerator, or, you could keep it on the counter for a little bit, but the more salt you have in there, kind of the more preservative you have with it. Salt is also a really helpful tool in extracting more of the buttermilk and more of the moisture, the water. So you're going to notice after you sprinkle the salt on the surface area of that butter, you're going to have little beads of buttermilk or little beads of water kind of extract from the butter itself. And so this is again where I agitate it around, I move it around as I'm mixing in that butter. This is why I make it really a flat surface area when I sprinkle the salt on, because that's just going to allow more butter droplets, basically buttermilk droplets, to come out. And you're going to see after you've mixed your salt around into your butter a little bit that you do have some buttermilk that has collected in the bottom of your bowl, and you're just going to pour that off. Now, after all of this working, my butter is actually quite soft, and I can feel that it's going to be a little bit too soft for me to form and work with, so I actually had to get down to stirring my Colby cheese anyways, so I ended up just throwing it into the fridge for a couple hours just to cool off and just become a little bit more firm, so it's easier to work with. But you don't have to do this, you can form it right away, no need to refrigerate. You will find that butter is not the same throughout a cow's entire lactation. It's not the same from cow to cow to cow. Some butter is softer, some butter is harder in different seasons, and so a lot of times I ended up doing different things throughout different seasons just because the butter is acting differently. Now, once I had taken it out of the refrigerator, and if you didn't want to do this, once you have finished extracting all the buttermilk and you've salted it, it's time to form your butter. Now, forming your butter can be as simple as just packing it into a dish, or it can be a little bit more complicated. You can use this fancy butter press like I have, and I like this butter press because it helps me to make about 1 pound of butter every single time. So I still haven't perfected using it. I've been using it for about 6 months now, and I still am not quite getting like exactly even little blocks, but I'm working on it. So what I do is I just pack the butter into there. I try to pack it as firmly as possible to make sure that there's no little air pockets or anything, and then you just push the handle down and it plops you out a little 1 pound block of butter. Now you can see there what I'm talking about with those little pockets where I haven't squished it down enough, and that's just me learning a new tool, but it works good enough because then I end up with little blocks of butter that are about 1 pound each. Now, another thing that I often used to do was I would pack all of the butter from my butter making day into like a bread pan or a baking dish, and I would put it in the refrigerator, and then I'd come back later and just cut it into blocks, so you can do that as well. You can also just make your own little blocks using wooden utensils, as you can see that I am doing here. Whatever way that you would like to make your butter or shape it is totally fine. And once you have got it into your desired shapes, and actually I will make one little note there, probably don't use your hands to shape it. A lot of recipes will say shape the butter with your hands. Because butter is a fat, it's so greasy, and even if you run your hands under cold water, it's so greasy, it's so messy if you shape it with your hands. So I prefer to just use tools when I'm working with butter, and that just makes it so much easier for me. So anyways, once you have shaped it into whatever shape you're going to use, you can either put it into the refrigerator, or I like to store small portions of butter on the counter. Homemade butter, as I kind of said, it doesn't act the same as store butter, so even though I like to have some on the counter, I don't have a ton on the counter because it will develop an off taste unless you're using cultured butter, which will be another video for another day. But so I store a small amount on the counter, and then the rest either gets stored in the refrigerator or in the freezer. Butter freezes so well, and I really recommend putting a bunch of butter in the freezer. I wrap it in parchment paper, and then I put it in Ziploc bags, and I just store them in there, and we pull out a block at a time, and it just keeps its flavor really good. Doesn't get any really off flavors or anything like that, as long as you've gotten most of the butter milk out. And I make a lot of butter in seasons where I'm getting a lot of cream, because it's not always a season where you're getting a lot of cream. Sometimes, like for example, when you're calf sharing, which is actually a season I'm in right now, I'm not getting a ton of cream, and so I like to put butter away when I can, when I'm getting a lot of cream, so that I have it in times when I'm not getting as much. Thank you guys for watching my video. One thing I did forget to show, and that I wanted to show, was just how I clean my butter making equipment. If you take some boiling hot water, I just boil the kettle, and you pour it into your blender. This actually melts the butter fat, and then I just pour it into the chicken bucket, or I pour it outside, and then that saves you from having to have that go down your drain. So that's one way that I just kind of keep everything a little bit cleaner. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. It's been so fun making these videos. If you haven't already, subscribe to my channel, and then come back next week. I post a video every Monday on all things cheese making and dairy processing and milk cows, and I would love to catch you on the next one. Okay, thanks, bye!